There's this video from PragerU about the Pope. You know that one that covered up all the child sex abuse? Obviously, this is a kid's educational video, so they don't mention the child sex abuse cover-up thing. So they talk about how communism is bad instead. The boys' class does this marking curve thing where kids with lesser grades are averaged out by the kids with the better grades or something.
Today in math class, Miss Calder told us about a new grading policy they want to start using. In order to level out the playing field, they're planning on lowering the grading scale so that more kids can start getting A's and B's when they haven't actually earned them. Isn't that crazy?
Oh, man.
Which is really bad. And also communist. So obviously, they need to go back into the past and see the Pope with their time-traveling history phone application, so they can learn from conservative-approved historical figures how best to deal with such terrible communism. I know, it's a weird premise, and I'm sure it'll have the children they're targeting absolutely enthralled. How could it not do with animation this captivating? And such compelling characters and stories that all the kids love, like Ronald Reagan. Kids love Reagan. Or the contemporary American conservative propaganda that the Nazis were atheists.
Like the communists, the Nazis did not believe in God either. They were a government set on controlling people, and people of faith challenged that control.
Oh, man.
Which I'm not sure is entirely true. Admittedly, this is only based on my quite pitiful attempt at internet-based research, mostly consisting of articles I could find on Google Scholar that I didn't have to pay for. £114 for a PDF. What the fuck? But from what I did manage to find, it seems as though the only real sensible conclusion you can come to is that it's not quite as easy as saying it's as black and white as Nazism is entirely godless, just as it's kind of silly to say it's Christian as well. Religious, maybe, because Nazism seems to be like a religion in its own right, based around a cult of personality. Interestingly though, one similarity that it does have to other religions such as Christianity is that the worldview is so vague, contradictory and fluid that no one person has exactly the same worldview as another. Even one person might not have the same view as themselves, depending on the context and the situation. For example, you can find instances where Hitler himself seems as though he could be anti-Christian, such as this example where he allegedly brags about missing a Catholic service, which apparently is a revolutionary masterstroke, as well as other examples and policies which would imply anti-Christian belief, or at the very least lip service to Christian belief. But then you can also find examples where he seems as though he is pro-Christian, such as his first radio broadcast when he became German Chancellor in 1933. Or his statement that was read out by Joseph Goebbels on the radio the day before the Sixth Army surrendered at Stalingrad. Although weirdly, the only source I can find for this has no citations. Regardless of this though, you can find plenty of examples which would imply that there is a Christian faith here. There's plenty of referencing to the Almighty, but as well as that, there's a lot of referencing to Jesus as well, which implies that you can use Jesus and Christianity to justify Nazi ideology, because Hitler and Goebbels did just that. Although it's quite difficult to say whether they are religious or non-religious, because they could be lying about either. And there's certainly a lot of political value in pretending that you are Catholic in a predominantly Catholic country, as Germany was at this time, because you need the support of those Christians to vote you into power, and you also need those Christians to support your war plans. Even if you're antagonistic towards Christianity, if you can justify your ideology through Christian belief, you could still get the support from those people of faith. And it's not as though Christianity and Nazism are completely incompatible. There was an attempt to co-opt Christianity to a more Nazified interpretation of Christianity, which, although it didn't work or even amount to anything, the mere attempt alone shows that there's not a huge amount of conflict, which I don't think should be really that much of a surprise for the time. Because Christians of this era believed that the Jews killed Jesus and saw them as cursed for not believing that Jesus was the Son of God. So they would have no reason to be upset about the Nazi anti-Semitism, which is the core and most consistent part of their ideology, because plenty of Christians were just as anti-Semitic and were already not that fond of the Jews anyway. Even if you take some of Nazism's more anti-Christian views, such as those held by Heinrich Himmler, who seemed to be in favour of more of a pagan religious worldview that's more in line with Germanic heritage and German culture, doesn't seem to be in that much conflict with Christianity or conservatism either, especially in a contemporary context. Because the very same symbolism that Heinrich Himmler was very fond of seems to be just as compelling to contemporary online conservative Nazis, as well as Republican conservative presidential candidates, all of which seem to be very fond of signalling their Christian virtues. Which is very interesting. However, and more importantly, Nazis were never condemned by the church, really. There wasn't any effort to excommunicate any of them. And it seems as though the Pope at the time put far more effort into condemning the Allied bombing campaign than he was ever willing to do about the roundup of the Jews in his own country, which feels an awful lot more like appeasement than it does condemnation. All the genocidal rhetoric was fine, I guess. But then again, that shouldn't really be all that surprising either, because the Vatican only decided that the Jews didn't kill Jesus in the 60s. So anti-Semitism would have been fine for them, until it became a PR nightmare. But even then, some conservatives are still upset about this deviation from Christian tradition. Also, an awful lot of Nazi war criminals were able to escape justice for their crimes against humanity because of the church's rat lines, where they hid fugitive Nazis on church property and helped them to escape in any way they could to Nazi-sympathizing countries such as Argentina. Also, there were some churches that rang out the bells on Hitler's birthday. There are even some churches that have Nazi bells within them to this day, that the population votes to keep within them. Doesn't really scream atheism and condemnation, really, does it? Now, none of this is to say that people of faith didn't fight against this control. Obviously, plenty of people did. But, to be fair and also balanced, for every example you can find of a person of faith who stood against the Nazis, you can also find an example of a person of faith who collaborated as well, such as those who collaborated by helping some of the Nazi high command from escaping captivity in Allied POW camps, as well as other Nazi war criminals who also have human rights abuses attached to their name, including some concentration camp commandants, but also some of the people who did the human experiments in those concentration camps too. And this kind of collaboration is so disturbing and shocking that it kind of makes a lot of the acts of resistance from people of faith at this time come across as almost pitiful in comparison, which I think is quite irresponsible, or at the very least misleading, but also potentially offensive or very insulting, and should be very embarrassing to generalize and reduce all this down to a simplified binary, where both communists and Nazis are godless atheists who just want control, and it was people of faith who
challenged that control.
Now, normally you wouldn't really have a reason to care about this, or find this surprising in any way. Historically accurate isn't really something we would expect from a conservative, and even less so for conservative content creators on the internet, especially when considering that the point of the propaganda of this episode is to try and convince you that the Nazis and the communists are bad because they're atheist or godless, which, coupled with other conservative propaganda such as the Democrats are communists and Republicans and conservatives are good Christians, could hopefully lead you to the conclusion that the Democrats and atheists are evil, just like the communists and the Nazis, and should be seen as and treated as just as much of an existential threat. It doesn't really matter whether it's true or whether it's not true. All that really matters is if it's compelling enough for you to think it could be true, or at least compelling enough to convince you to be a reliable conservative voter. And, for some reason, this channel and this channel's content is now part of legal legislation which allows it to be part of actual educational curriculums. Which brings me on to the main point of this video, which I think is most interesting. This map. Now, with this video being allegedly educational, I don't think it would be an unreasonable expectation for a map in that historical educational video to be historically accurate to the point in time that it's supposed to depict. But this map is a little bit weird, right? Firstly, it looks like they've put Poland in the wrong place, and then tried to correct it with an arrow, which still doesn't really make it clear that the bit that is Poland is labelled as Poland. More interestingly though, what moment in time do you think this map is supposed to depict? Now, I would think that this would be post-World War II that they're trying to depict here. The Soviet Union, for example, includes the Baltic states, although it does have the ghost of the Estonian border for some reason. But regardless, the Soviet Union didn't include the Baltic states until the Second World War. But we also have a unified Germany, which didn't exist like this until the fall of the Soviet Union in the 1990s. So to have a unified Germany like this, the Baltic states would be independent, as well as Belarus and Ukraine, and the Soviet Union wouldn't even exist, it would be Russia. For it to be Germany during the time the Soviet Union existed, it would be West Germany and East Germany, with its little West Germany Berlin nipple, which would be a very unusual mistake to make, especially considering they also did an episode before this about Ronald Reagan, where they visited Ronald Reagan at the Berlin Wall, which they referenced in this episode.
We met President Reagan. He's awesome.
So they know about the Berlin Wall, and I assume they know about East and West Germany too, and the Berlin nipple. So clearly this can't be a post-World War II map. So what moment in time is this map actually supposed to be depicting? Well, this map is supposed to be pre-World War II. 1939 pre-World War II to be specific, because what this map is supposed to be showing us is the invasion of Poland by Nazi Germany and the Soviet Union, which is somehow significantly more weirder than if it was actually supposed to be depicting a post-war map of Europe. It's actually impressive how wrong this map is if it's supposed to be depicting the 1939 map of Europe. But the fact that this is actually supposed to be an educational video for children and can actually now be used to actually educate actual children in an actual school, it's mind-blowing. It's not going to do it any favors to the cultural stereotype of Americans, is it? The 1930s and 40s in Europe are probably one of the most well-documented times in Europe, so I have absolutely no idea how it's even possible for you to make a history video and manage to use a map that's incorrect from that time. It's really weird because I don't even know how you can be charitable about this. The map of Europe has changed an awful lot over the last 100 years, although most of those changes have been quite subtle and to countries you don't really care about. But one of the most noticeable changes to the look of the map over the last 100 years is the Polish border. That changed precisely at this point in time, that this map is supposed to be educationally illustrating to us. The German and Polish borders between World War I and World War II were already quite different, but during 1939, at the point that this map is supposed to be depicting, it was different again, because at this time, Germany included both Austria and the Sudetenland, which was part of Czechoslovakia. Interestingly though, the Polish border which is depicted here is kind of about where the Soviet Union went up to when it invaded into Poland in 1939. Which kind of makes them using this map with this border of Poland kind of interesting when depicting the Soviet Union invading Poland in 1939, because it kind of has the implication that PragerU agrees with the Soviet Union's claim to that area of Poland's territory at this time. This shows us that Poland's original border didn't include the parts that the Soviet Union annexed, according to Prager University. And I'm not sure what that means. Could you say that Dennis Prager is a tanky? Because it's a bit pro-Stalinist, isn't it? Comrade Dennis, the accidental communist. Or at least I think it's accidental to be this wrong about this map. Although I'm not even sure. Just as a map of Europe, it's really quite nuts. There's a very unusual mix of very detailed and very not detailed at all, to the point that the more you actually look at this map, the more confusing and absurdist it becomes. Like with the British Isles, the shape of it isn't too bad. Scotland and Ireland have enough detail for it to look like the outline of Scotland and Ireland. There's even the extra added detail of the smaller islands too, like the Faroe Islands and the Shetland Islands, even the Isle of Man, and Jersey and Guernsey. But look at Wales. They've done Wales really dirty there. They've managed to put Anglesey in and sort of hinted at the Wirral Peninsula, which is a very rare attention to detail for a map of this scale, but also a very unusual attention to detail, especially for a map that simplified Wales to the point that they filled in the Cardigan Bay and made Wales not look like Wales. Now, like I've said, it's not all that weird or unusual to have an abstracted or simplified map of the British Isles, especially for a map of this scale. It's just when you have the detail of all the tiny islands that you often forget, and then you fuck up Wales, it's a bit strange and a little bit rude. All of that good Welsh will towards Americans when Ryan Reynolds bought Wrexham and helped them to become slightly less shit. Ruined by Dennis Prager and his terrible map. Now, I can see that this could come across as a bit of a nitpicky argument to point out the inconsistencies of including tiny islands but messing up larger land masses. It is quite a pedantic point and quite tedious and very pointless because even though some of the land masses that have been messed up to the point that they're almost unrecognisable, they are recognisable enough for you to know that it's a map of Europe and to identify the countries outlined on the map. But it is a contradiction that makes some of the mistakes in this map just seem much more bizarre. For example, we have the tiny islands of the British Isles included, but we don't have the tiny islands of the Canary Islands included, which, much like the abstracted simplification of Wales and the Wirral Peninsula, isn't all that unusual for a map of this scale. Although, maps at this scale that don't include the other Canary Islands, or the Azores or Madeira Islands, usually don't include those Atlantic islands because they've been cropped off. Which could imply that the original map that they used as a reference to make this one was cropped off here. And when they expanded the map out over the Atlantic, they either didn't realise that there were other islands there, or they did realise there were other islands there and they didn't really care, or think it was necessary to add that level of detail to their historical and educational video. It's very hard to work out whether the inaccuracies and mistakes in this map are by mistake, or if they're done on purpose. But at least this mistake here seems like it's logical that it could be an accident. But if we move over to the Mediterranean islands, there's some mistakes that just seem a little bit too bizarre to be entirely accidental. We have more tiny islands again, like the islands off of Tunisia and even the Isle of Elba off of Italy. But Malta's missing. And sure, Malta's a tiny island, but it's a tiny island that's an independent country. So if you have the tiny island of Elba and the Tunisian islands and Jersey and Guernsey, which aren't independent countries, it makes it all the more weirder that they exist on this map, but Malta doesn't. But that's not even the weirdest one, because Malta isn't the only independent country that's an island in the Mediterranean Sea. Because Cyprus is as well, which for some reason also doesn't exist in this map. And I have absolutely no idea how that's even possible. Now, the only two possible explanations for this is either it's done on purpose or it's done by mistake. And I don't know how you could make this mistake. And I have absolutely no idea why you would do it on purpose. At least you can kind of understand that they could make a mistake like colouring in the Peloponnesian Peninsula as a separate state, which I'm pretty sure hasn't been a thing since like 400 BC. Now, it's an extremely stupid mistake to make, but at least it kind of looks like a separate island, sort of. But I've no idea how you explain Cyprus not existing at all. It's all so weird, isn't it? It just gets more confusing the more you look at it. Using an entirely historically inaccurate map to depict a moment in history in your educational history video for children is one thing. But to use a map that doesn't even include Cyprus is just kind of baffling. Prager University is extremely well funded, and Dennis Prager is extremely well connected to the point that, as mentioned before, videos just like these can now be used as actual educational content in American schools. And yet, despite all of that funding and all of those contacts, nobody noticed an extremely stupid error that even an idiot could have noticed and confirmed with a very simple Google search. So I don't even think we can give the charitability and say that this is an innocent mistake. Because this map has been made, it's been edited and animated, and then it must have been approved before publication. And it seems that at no point anyone even noticed that there was a mistake or even tried to amend that mistake if they did notice. If you're able to make silly mistakes like using the wrong country's borders for the time period and losing Cyprus without anyone noticing, what else could they have gotten wrong? Which should be extremely concerning for anyone who thinks that using this content to educate children or to educate anyone really is a good idea. What does this say about their approach to education and their approach to history and reality? At this point, with the sheer volume and stupidity of the mistakes made in this map, it's probably more charitable to say that this is done on purpose rather than by accident. Because otherwise, this is just rank incompetence to such moronically stupid levels that I can only assume that whoever was involved in making this map and editing this video has to wear Velcro shoes because they can't tie their own shoelaces together. Actually, now that I think about it, maybe Dennis Prager is providing the global community with a very valuable service, keeping people this stupid away from operating heavy machinery. I mean, imagine how much worse the world would be if people who could make mistakes this stupid had real jobs that actually mattered. They can't have innocently have just chosen the wrong map that wasn't the 1939 map of Europe, because this map includes some of those 1939 borders, just not the ones with Germany and Poland, that you would think would be pretty vital for an historical educational video. So they must have started with a 1939 map of Europe and then decided to change the borders of Germany and Poland to their modern borders to illustrate this historic moment with different borders. Which is extremely strange, right? I don't think I've ever seen this happen before in any other historical or educational media. Any film that would be depicting this moment in history would use the correct map. Any documentary that you'll see on TV depicting this moment in history would use the correct map. Even the videos you could find on YouTube depicting this moment in history would probably use the correct map. It should really be the least you could expect. But for some reason, this historical educational video that can now be used by actual schools, they've decided for some reason to fictionalize the historical map. It's quite hard to work out why anyone would ever think this would be a good idea. But my speculative guess as to why anyone would think this would be a good idea to do would probably be something like maybe using a modernized version of the borders of Germany and Poland would be more recognizable and easier to understand for a modern audience or a stupider audience, you know, like children. But then again, we have the 1939 border of Finland and the 1939 border of the Spanish protectorate in Morocco, which we don't understand as a modern audience of stupid children. Also, Cyprus is still missing, which is just going to confuse everybody. Regardless of whatever the reason this map exists is, I think it does show something quite interesting about modern conservative media and their desire to push this type of propaganda into everybody's children. Most of these Leo and Layla videos seem to have an equally fictional approach towards history, and I think it hints at a broader fictionalized view towards reality that conservatives like Dennis Prager also have. Their worldview is just a figment of their imagination, and it shows through in their creative expression. But I'm not sure how useful this would be as propaganda, even if it is successful. Because sure, you can convince people that history happened in the way that you fictionally interpret that it did, but it's not difficult to prove that you're wrong. Especially when you're creatively interpreting things that have been extremely well documented, like maps that you can find on Google and things that people have said.
Our system is wonderful, and the Constitution is a glorious liberty document.
That you can also find on Google.
The rich inheritance of justice, liberty, prosperity, and independence, bequeathed by your fathers, is shared by you, not by me.
So the best thing that you can really hope for is that someone who watches this seriously as an educational piece of media is that they'll just be so incurious that they'll take it on face value and not think or even care to crack open the Google tab and have a look, which may be very unlikely that that would even happen. But in the unlikely event that it is likely and someone does open the Google tab, then you've just got someone there that's realized that you're lying to them.
Oh, man.
But not just that, it also shows that you've got so little respect for them and their intelligence that you've tried to teach them something as truth that turns out to be entirely fictional. I wonder what that would do to someone's trust, whether it would breed resentment towards authority figures or teachers or parents or even conservatism as a concept. I think the only real value any of these videos have as an educational tool for children is similar to the concept of Santa. It's the first example of deception, lack of respect, and violation of trust that you get from people that you're led to believe have your best interests at heart. I guess that it could come across as a little bit absurd to think that a small detail like a map forgetting that Cyprus exists, or having historically inaccurate borders for the historical moment it's trying to depict, would lead to someone feeling that they're being lied to, disrespected, or even manipulated. But sometimes it can be little details like this that can be the beginning point of people's deconversions from religions or cults or other ideologies. Which is kind of what I think's really interesting about this map and PragerU and other conservatives' children's content. Because it feels like the propaganda is at the forefront over accuracy and historical facts. Which I think will lead to inaccuracies such as this, which will do nothing more than just make a rod for the conservative movement's own back. Because all it's going to take is for someone to sincerely watch this as a historical educational piece of media, have an interest in the content, and then look on Google and find out that it's incorrect or a lie. And then they've got everything they need from then on to think, what else have they lied to me about? What else have they gotten wrong? These contemporary conservative media figures may be very successful, turning politics and culture towards conservatism. But just like with silly mistakes like this, either by accident or on purpose, it seems as though conservative media already contains all of the ingredients that you need to spark someone's skepticism enough to begin their conversion story away from the conservatism that this type of propaganda is trying to groom them towards. Especially when your propaganda is so stupid that you use an historically inaccurate map to depict a very well-documented historical moment, and you didn't realise that Cyprus was missing. Although, to be fair, it's not the worst thing in the world. It's not as though they have an even more simplified version of the European map in the same video, which does include all of the bits that they missed. Now that would be dumb as fuck.
I want mommy, I want milk, I want to be held, I want to be comforted. And if you do not do all these things immediately, I will ruin your life. I want mommy, I want milk. I want mommy, I want milk. I will ruin your life. I want